So, for those of you who weren't here in the last couple of weeks, as I said earlier, we're looking at a series, The Promises of the Cross. So we considered in the first week that, remember a couple of weeks ago when we had the baptism of Sandy and Billy, who are away running a 5K today, I believe. I'm tired even saying that. And so and I felt it fell quite nicely. It wasn't planned that way, but it fell quite nicely that we were talking that day about the promise of that God would set his people free. You know, the promise of deliverance. And we were thinking about the Israelites in slavery in Egypt and how God took them out of that situation to a new beginning. And then Sheena last week guided us through looking at the promise of forgiveness and challenged us in a number of ways in doing so. So we come this week then to the promise of God's presence. And I hope that those young ones that went out, that they have some sense of that, whatever that looks like at this point in their life. But just that they would know that he cares for them and he loves them. So on that note, let me tell you a little story. So this came from a podcast. I didn't listen to all the podcasts, but I became aware of a snippet of it, and it's a guy, Matthew West. He's a Christian singer in the United States, and he tells a story of he went to a Christian camp with his daughter, and there was a number of mums and parent and child situation in a number of games. So one of the games that they played one day, or one of the tasks, was that the parent had to guide the child through some woods that were beside the camp, and the child would be blindfolded. So the parents were told at the beginning. He tells this story in the podcast, and he says the instruction at the beginning was that they could hold their child's hand. They could, and then they had to give the child, before they started, they had to give the child these three instructions, or these three statements, if you will, had to be said to the child. So one, I'll never leave you. They had to say that to the child, I'll never leave you. Secondly, you can ask me anything. And then thirdly, listen for my voice only. So I'll never leave you. You can ask me anything. Listen for my voice only. And he says, so that's sort of fine. He had his daughter by the hand, and he was guiding her through the forest, through all the pitfalls, all the ups and downs, over fallen trees and all this sort of carry on, sort of guiding her through. And then halfway through, each pair had like a camp helper with them to make sure there was no cheating and things. So halfway through, everyone was stopped, and the parents were pulled aside, the fathers, mothers were pulled aside, and then the helper who was there told them that the rules have changed. You can no longer hold them by the arm. You can no longer hold them by the arm. And from this point on, unless directly asked, you can't speak to her. And now the child doesn't know what the instructions, that things have changed. They're just standing there with the blindfold on in the middle of the woods. But the parents were told, but you can follow along, you can be near them, we want you near them, but you can no longer hold their hand, and you can't speak to them unless they speak to you. So he tells the story that, so fine, he comes back near his daughter, and they restart the game, and the camp volunteer takes the girl's arm and leads her into kind of like a big ditch, and just lets go of her hand and leaves her there. And Matthew West talks about how he saw very quickly how his daughter forgot number 1 and number 3 of the instructions or the statements that had been made. One, she was told that he would never leave her, but initially she seemed completely to have forgotten that, and acted as if she had forgotten that. She'd thought that Dad wasn't there. And he says it was obvious she'd also forgotten that she should listen for my voice only, because the camp leader had led her, come down this way, come into the ditch, and she'd follow those instructions. She didn't resist it in any way. She was just led into the ditch and followed the voice of the camp leader rather than listening for her dad. So she forgot that clearly. And she was left there having to try and feel her way out, trying to feel her way through things, having forgotten 1 and 3, until she got to the point where it was obvious she was getting quite panicky and a bit desperate, wanted to win the game or whatever, win the race or whatever. She did remember number 2, you can ask me anything. And she asked this question, he says, Dad, are you still there? And from that point, they could talk, because she'd asked that direct question, and he said, yes, I'm still there. And then she could ask him questions to help her get out. Dad, are you still there? Well, I wonder, how are you feeling today? I wonder, are you someone who's sitting asking a similar question of God? Maybe you're someone here today who has a strong sense of God's presence in your life at the moment. Maybe you've felt that for many years, and it's given you great strength and courage to face some difficult things you face. Maybe you're coming here today and you're thinking, well, for starters, who's God, really? Maybe earlier in your life you did have a sense of God being present, but maybe you felt that that's kind of been on the wane. Or maybe you're someone who for a long time has felt strongly God's presence, but recently you've been going through something and it feels like, is he still there? You know? Dad, are you still there? Becomes a very important, provocative question. Now, you might remember a few weeks back, I was talking, it was during the service actually, when we were looking at the promise of deliverance, of being set free. And I was talking about when I conduct funerals, which happens from time to time, of course. And I always try in the funeral service to point people towards the promise of the cross and remind them or tell them that their pain will not last eternally. That there is the promise of an end to the suffering that we go through grief. There is God is promising a place for you where there will be no more tears. And likewise, I always try, in that context of a funeral service, I always try to tell folks or remind folks of this other promise of the cross, the promise of God's presence. And actually, at the very first prayer in the funeral service, I'll always remind them that though God was the creator of the heavens and the earth, the moon and the stars, the hills and the seas, and he's so vast and he's so powerful, and our lives are so small and fragile and, short by comparison to his powerful and eternal nature, that same God still cares for you, and he cares for you to an extent you could not possibly imagine, to the extent that he would give his son to die for your rescue. So I always like to try and remind people that God's there in that moment of their grief, of their pain, that he's with us. The promise of God's presence for all who would believe that and trust in him. You see, one of the most painful consequences of the fall of humanity, what am I talking about there? I'm talking about Genesis and how we're taught there. The book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, taught that God creates a world that's perfect, that's beautiful. It's a place where we can walk and talk with God. So we were used to God's presence. That was a normal thing, to be speaking with God, to be face to face with God, to be in his company. Well, we turned our backs on God. The Bible tells us, the book of Genesis tells us this, and we rebel against God. And one of the biggest losses is this loss of his company, the loss of the sense of his presence in our lives. When we had to leave Eden, we no longer enjoyed the company of God, the presence of God. And in a sense, we were like the young girl in the story, Matthew West's daughter, when she's in the ditch, when everything is confusing and everything's dark and everything's strange and everything's very alien. And instead of being sure of who we were and where we were and whose we were and what we were about, that was all gone. And we're feeling our way in the dark, aren't we? I mean, that's what it feels like sometimes. You're just feeling your way in the dark. You're just trying to get through day by day, just trying to survive, quite honestly, at times. We've got doubts, we've got insecurities, and on top of all that, we've got a million different voices with a million different ideas about the way we should go, and they're all speaking to us, and all that clamor and all that noise is in our ears all the time. So I think of all our losses when we turned our back on God, I think that's one of the biggest ones, the loss of God's presence, the sense that He's with us. And I think that walking through life like that, and as I said to the young ones, when I was until the age of 19, that was my life. And trying to walk through life like that is a bit like trying to pick up the coins with your thumb out of operation. It feels like you're constantly fighting against yourself. You're constantly being hampered. It feels like you don't have the tools to cope. At times, it feels like you don't have even anywhere close to all the answers. You don't even know the right questions to ask, and it feels like you're just feeling your way through all of that when you don't have the security of God's presence. So we're left dazed, and we're left out of sorts, and we're left confused. And there are lots of disorientating elements, not only the voices that I've talked about, the people saying, you should try this, you should do this, you should read that book, you should follow that life plan, you should do this. There's all different people with all sorts of different opinions, and that they're firing at you at all times. But on top of all that, there's other things that are disorientating you too. There's other noise, there's other stuff going on that makes it really hard to try and see your way forward at times. Sickness, money worries, when you've got relationship problems, and then all the problems of the world. I mean, we seem to take that on board all the more because I guess we can't escape it. It's in our phones. It's just all around us all the time. So we've got all of that on top of what is already a very difficult situation we find ourselves in. So is it any wonder that people just say at times, it's all too much. It's just all too much. And it causes people really to despair. But for the Christian, things are different. And as I say, I know this because I've lived those two different lives. I've lived life without the presence of God, and I've lived life with an ever-growing sense of His presence, and also, just having got to know Him better, and know that this is not a God who stands even silently beside us, but if we ask Him, just like the girl, if we ask Him, if we pray to Him, that He can make it clear to us the way that we should go. We've got His Word in the Bible to guide us in that regard too. So for the Christian, things are different. Yes, we're not robots. We have emotions. We're no different from anyone else outside in the sense that the world is confusing to us at times. It's a dark place for us at times. It's a disorientating place for us at times. We go through exactly the same problems as everyone else. If you cut us, we'll bleed, and so on. It is confusing. It's lonely at times, and the world is a very hostile environment. But what believers have is this promise of the cross, the promise of God's presence. James chapter 4 verse 8 says, "Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you." Is that not just a simple, and does that not encapsulate much of what I've been talking about in the past, 10 minutes or whatever? Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. That is the promise that James speaks of there. And it's the promise that was given to Joshua and all of God's people in the first reading from Deuteronomy. The people there at a point where Moses is handing over leadership. Moses is not going to be entering the promised land. So it's time for a new leader, and Joshua is going to be that man. And so Moses speaks to him and to the people, to the crowd. And so there's a promise on two levels: the individual promise that God will be with Joshua, that he must be strong and courageous because God's got his back and what he's going to face. And then the promise to the people too. It's their promise as well, that they should trust him and follow Joshua, and again that God will have them. He'll be with them in all of that. He'll be present. So the cross of Christ holds the promise of us drawing near to God and Him drawing near to us. And that's one of the promises of the cross that will that matters, that counts. Now, Revelation 21 last book of the Bible. We've talked about Genesis, first book of the Bible, Revelation 21, last book of the Bible. We hear these words, Luke, God's dwelling place is among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. So there is that promise of that we'll be in a place once again, as we were when we were first created for a relationship with God, that we'll be in a place in the future. If we trust in God, there'll be a place that we will share with God. We'll be in his company again. And there'll be no more tears. There'll be no more sorrow. There'll be no more crying. There'll be no more pain because God's with his people and everything's right. Right? Okay, so that's the ultimate destination of the promise. And you think, well, have you not, Scott, just been talking in the past wee while about the promise operating now, in the here and now? But this promise seems distant. Revelation 21 seems distant. It's talking about a future time. Well, both things are true. That promise will be fully realized at a future point. But believe me, the promise of God's presence is yours now. It's not just a future promise. It's not something you think, oh, well, it seems so far away. It seems so far removed from my problems right now. No, listen, the promise is yours now. It's not fully realized, maybe, but very much part of the reality of our lives. From the moment that God becomes our God, from the moment that God draws near to us, he promises that he will be there. He'll show up. He'll show up and he'll be present. And that's all that matters. You know, the older I get and as the years go by, I became a dad at 19, and at times I think, oh, that's been an awful long time. I'm a couple of years away, really, from that being, 30 years having kids to think about. But, the more that goes on, I just realize more and more, do you know what matters the most is that you're there, that you're just present. I don't profess to be I know I make mistakes. Yesterday at dinner, I managed to offend two of them. And they ran up to the rooms crying, and I'm getting the hassle from my son who's older, and my daughter-in-law's there, and and she's turning at me, and then Sharon's having a wee nip at me as well. And I was like, oh, how did I manage to get myself into this mess? So, listen, I know I'm not the most perfect father out there. Thankfully, God is a perfect father. I'm not, but being there matters. Being present for them matters. And at times that's all. Do you know what? At times that's all I've got, and I'll try and be there. It's not easy. None of this is easy. But God promises his presence, and we've got to try and trust that he is there with us. Now, knowing that and acting on that are two very different things. Faith is a gift, the Bible teaches us, but every day we have freedom as to how we're going to live and as to the choices that we're going to make. From the moment you wake up, not just the trivial things like what you're going to have for your breakfast, but there's going to be choices that are going to send you down one path or another every single day. And so, although faith is a gift and it's not of our work, and thankfully not, and although God lavishes us with loads of blessings and he promises us so many things and he promises he'll be with us, knowing that and then acting upon that are two very different things when you've got free will. And it's so easy to let the world drown out the promise that we've just been thinking about and speaking about. It's so easy to forget that God's there, that God cares, that he's present. So simple. All the worries, the daily tasks, the chores, the school run, all this stuff. And then, as I said, not to speak of the chaos on our TV and phones and all the other stuff going on in our life as well. It's easy to let those things rob us of a sense of God's presence. Easy for us to spend more time fretting, worrying, complaining, more time on social media, railing against the world as we do, and then lose a sense that God's there, that God cares, that we could turn to him, that we could speak to him. Remember in the story, the girl very quickly forgets two things. She's almost on the verge of forgetting the second one, and that would be critical, that she could ask her father anything. But that's sometimes where the world will drag you to that place where you think, look, God doesn't care. Where is God? And all this stuff that's going on in the Middle East, and where's God and all of that? How do you make sense of any of that stuff? When you hear stories of such sadness, young people dying and people dying in tragic circumstances. And you just think, where's God in all of that? How do we even start to trust in His word and His promise? And there's lots of things that are choices of our own making. So not only are we letting all these voices speak to us and letting them in, that's a choice, but we're also making other choices that making the wrong choices at times that make all of this very difficult to believe and to trust that God is with us and that God cares and He's present. And so we find it overwhelming, and again, we're back to being disorientated, being blinded, being blindsided, being confused by circumstances that we find ourselves in and by decisions that we've made that have led us down that path. And you know what? That is exactly where the enemy wants us. And you can speak of the enemy, Satan, the evil one, whatever you want to do it. As some people might just think of it as rather than a personification, as a force that's working against you, sin. But at the end of the day, it's exactly where the enemy wants you to be. He wants you, if I'm going to personify him, he wants you feeling lost. He wants you feeling confused. He wants you feeling helpless. He wants you feeling alone. That's exactly what he wants you to believe, that God doesn't care about you and that God isn't there. But if you're aware of God's presence, then that bandage gets ripped off. You're no longer hampered. You're no longer left feeling helpless and alone. You feel empowered. You feel like maybe you've got the tools to get through this, to make progress, to become stronger, to get done what needs to be done. You start to feel that with God at your side, that so many things become possible. You have a purpose in your life. You have a direction in your life. Now, therefore, those two things that I've said, the enemy wants you in one place, God's promise will take you to another place, and so that means that there's a battle for you. You're being dragged in two different directions. And again, we're making choices every day, and God gives us the freedom to do so, but I think that God, like in the task at the beginning of the story, the father, he was able to say to his daughter, I'll never leave you. You can ask me anything. Listen only to my voice. I think God says the same thing to us. I think he's saying exactly the same thing to us today. I'll never leave you. You can ask me anything and listen only to my voice. Now, when we get ourselves entangled in the ways of the world and we get ourselves in the ditch, it's very easy to forget all three. 1 in 3, I think, like the girl, 1 in 3 fall pretty quickly. I'll never leave you. We start doubting that pretty much straight off the bat. If you're sitting in a hospital waiting room awaiting tests, and you most likely know this is going to become a bad outcome. It's very, very difficult in a scenario like that to imagine that God's with you. If you're sitting under some bombardment, or if your family was slaughtered by some regime, you've lost your son or your daughter or whatever, it's very, very difficult in those scenarios. I know they're extreme, but there's lots of other scenarios that make you doubt this too, but very difficult to believe that God's with you. So number one falls very quickly. We're so frail, we're so fragile. It falls quickly. And then listen only to my voice. Well, that's often the last thing we do. Let's be honest, it's the last thing we do. We go looking for our answers anywhere else but God. So they fall pretty quickly. And it seems at times that the only thing the girl had left was, you can ask me anything. Number one falls quickly. Look at the Israelites. We talked about the Israelites. They come out of slavery in Egypt, and very, very quickly are they moaning about their new situation. Oh, we should have stayed in Egypt. It was okay. We were getting treated like slaves, made to work all day long, getting beaten also. But it was better then. I mean, this is what we're like. We very quickly grumble, very quickly complain, very quickly doubt that God's with us, that God cares. So very easy to one drop, very easy to three follow on its heels. But number 2 is intriguing. You can ask me anything. Dad, are you still there? If we lose that, then everything's lost. Things are really bad. If we lose the desire to I'll call it prayer, but actually, a cry of help can be a prayer. It is a prayer. But if we lose that, if we lose that, you can ask me, and if we lose sense of that, then we really are in trouble. We have to hold on to at least number 2. If all you have left is a complaint for God, good, give him your complaint. Literally, if that's all you have left, you're at the end of your tether, and that's all you've got, then give him it. Because he says, you can ask me anything. So ask him why you're going through this. If that's where you're starting from, if that's how bad things got, if that's how deep in the ditch you are, there's no harm in that. Number 2, you can ask me anything, we'll do it. Even if all you're going to do is shout at him, complain at him, get angry at him, do it. It's when you lose the desire or the sense or that you could do that's possible, that's a really desperate place to be. Even if you have an overwhelming sense of abandonment, even if you can't sense God's presence at all, even if all you've got is just complaint, give him it. Because the complaint is like the girl asking, Dad, are you still there? You know, at times, all you can muster is a moan and a whinge. Well, if that's all you've got, if that's your lot, take it to him. Because at least then, you're acknowledging that he's still there. At least then, you have a sense of his presence. Even if you've forgotten that he said, I'll always be with you, even if that's long gone. Even if he said, you know, as he said to the disciples, I'll be with you to the end of the age. If that sense of that is long gone, if the memory of that is long gone in your life, and you're too busy listening to the other voices of the world, the noise and clamor of the world, that you forget to listen to his voice. If you're in that situation, even if all you've got left is desperation, cry out, Dad, are you still there? Do you know, I think God often lets us stand on our own 2 feet. You know, the way that a parent, you kind of have to do that as the child grows, you have to kind of let go. That's hard, but you have to, because they have to learn to walk by themselves. They have to learn to feel their way through the world by themselves. And I think God does this with us. He wants us to trust him, even when it feels like he's not there. Even when he makes it sometimes maybe feel like it's not there for our own good, he wants you to trust him. That is faith lived out, after all. When you can see nothing else, can't see a way forward, but you still believe. When all is dark, you still see that wee bit of a flame, that light. If that's all you've got, then it's something. And he wants you to trust him even in the most difficult of times. He gives you the tools to do his will. He gives you the directions in his word. He's given you all you need to complete the tasks that he puts before you, but he is not going to do it all for you. He's going to let your hand go at times. And at times it's going to feel like he's been silent, like he's not speaking to you, that it's all silence around you. And in those moments, he wants you to trust. And it might feel like he's abandoning you, but you need to recall that 1, 2, 3, I won't leave you. You can ask me anything. Listen for my voice only. So I want to just finish with a reference to C.S. Lewis's work, Screwtape Letters. So C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. That's what he's best known for in terms of his literature. But he wrote a book called the Screwtape Letters, and it was what he's doing in that letter. It's all about, in that book, it's about a chief demon, and the demon is writing to his nephew, who's like a junior demon. And what he's doing is he's putting down all ideas for how you can attack Christians, how you can attack the believer, how you can attack people's trust in God, how you can attack their sense of security in God. So the whole these series of letters to this nephew, this junior demon, are all just advice as to how you can make the Christian feel uneasy, make them doubt God, make them not believe in God ultimately. And I think that honestly I would have advised you to read that, because one of the first books I read actually as a young Christian, and it was amazing when you read through it and you think, oh, actually that is me. Like, you can see yourself in what the chief demon calls the patient. He calls the Christians the patient, and you think, oh, that is me. I am susceptible to that. I am vulnerable to that. You start seeing yourself in the book. It's really, really good, powerful stuff. He's such a great writer, C.S. Lewis. But the enemy, this is not a work of fiction in a sense, because the enemy is working against you, and he does want you to doubt and despair, and he does want you to believe that God is no longer with you. But even if that is true for you at the moment, even if you feel that is the truth, and even if you feel like your back's to the wall, if all you've got is, if you could just muster up a whimper, just a word of complaint, anything, and take it to the Lord, that's a start. Let me just read some, I'm going to finish just by reading part of that work, C.S. Lewis's work. So remember, this is the chief demon, the uncle, writing to his nephew, the junior demon. And he says this about God. He says, he leaves the creature, that's Aslot, by the way, he leaves the creature to stand up on its own legs, to carry out from the will alone duties which have lost all relish. So we've all been there where we feel like everything's just a chore, everything's hard. And then he goes on, he says, hence the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him best. That's God. God loves those prayers that come from a desperate heart, from a heart that's just crying out as a last resort almost. Like he says, the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him best. And then he goes on in the chief demon says, he wants them to learn to walk and must therefore take away his hand. And if only the will to walk is really there, he is pleased even with their stumbles. So and I like to think of God like that. Look, we're like toddlers. And you know that way where your child's probably like took one step and fell over and almost bashed their head on the coffee table or something. But you're amazed, you're like, they're walking. Well, he says, he wants them to learn to walk. And he takes away his hand and he's pleased with their stumbles. So that's how God views us. But he says to his nephew, this demon, he says, do not be deceived, Wormwood. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring, but still intending to do our enemy's will, looks around a universe from which every trace of him, that's every trace of God, seems to have vanished, and still asks, remember? Ask me anything. Asks why he has been forsaken and still obeys. I think those words are so powerful. Let me just read that last part again. Wormwood, do not be deceived. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human no longer desiring, but still intending to do our enemy, that's God's will, looks around a universe from which every trace of him, that is God, every trace of him, seems to have vanished, and still asks why he has been forsaken, and still obeys. Well, and still is what we must be about. If all we've got left is just but a little, let's give it to him, let's take it to him, and let's keep on. Amen.